Hey everybody! So today we are going to continue our home woodshop projects. We are going to make a rustic bench today, believe it or not. So rustic meaning typically that it is a type of furniture or building where you're taking things right from the woods. So you have branches, or parts of trees that you are taking from the woods and then building, not changing them that much. So working with the curves and the bumps that are, and any other things that would normally be considered imperfections. So working with those things to make something. And we make rustic benches at DCD. We might be making other rustic furniture in future years. But today we're gonna make our own version out of cardboard. And if you have access to a saw and wood at home, that is awesome. You could make your own rustic furniture out of wood, but for the purposes of this activity, I am going to be doing another version in cardboard. Alrighty, so you're gonna need scissors, you're gonna need a ruler. I have a cutting mat. You could also use like if you have an old yoga mat that you don't care about, that's a pretty good substitution for a cutting mat. Or you can also just use another piece of cardboard or cut on a surface that you're okay with getting little lines, marks, scores from the blade in. But you definitely want to make sure you have something to cut on that you don't care about getting marked up. Scissors, utility knife. Here's two different versions of utility knives, and then you could also use an x-acto knife, or if you really don't have any of those things, you can use the blade, like the tip of your scissors, really carefully. I'll show that in a minute, to cut like that, or you can use a, I would say not a super sharp, but a semi-dull knife from your kitchen. And then I just have a bunch of cardboard. You can use shoe boxes, you can use things that got sent to you in the mail, packages, like I have more of these mail boxes here. Moving boxes are good if you have any of those hanging around. Any kind of cardboard works. All right, okay, so I'm just gonna do a quick drawing of the parts of a rustic bench. There's lots of different designs, but my 5th graders will be familiar with this because we've gone over this at school. So we have our top, and then we have our legs, which are usually round. They're branches, but they could really be made out of lots of different shapes. I'm gonna draw them a little wavy here to show that they are rustic. Maybe there's even some branches coming off. Okay, so we have 4 legs. It's about as simple as it gets. And then we have these. So we have legs. I hope that this is showing right side up. Top, or you could also call this the bench. And then we have these things, which is the most important part of this drawing for you to know, the least obvious name, which are called stretchers. And those help us keep our rustic bench strong. They help keep the bench from swaying. Like imagine these 2 stretchers, right? Could either splay out or they could sway side to side, and then the bench might collapse. So they kind of keep everything framed out. They keep everything stretched out. That's why they're called stretchers. So the bench doesn't collapse or break eventually. So those are the parts that we're gonna make today. You could make one that is tall and skinny. You could make one that has a different stretcher design, more like braces or brackets that go at angles. You can modify this. I'm so excited to see how you will modify it to make it your own. So that is our basic rustic bench parts. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna prep all my cardboard. So I'm just kind of cutting it into, these scissors always get loose on me. So Just gonna tighten that little nut on my scissors. I'm gonna cut it into pieces. And I'm starting to think about what size do I want my top of my bench to be. And I think that I'm just gonna make it this size that was kind of already a part of my box. So we are gonna cut a bunch of pieces for the top to make it as thick as it might be. So you do need a substantial amount of cardboard. And like these pieces that are not the same size, I'm just gonna take there's one edge that's more straight and I'm gonna use that. I'm just gonna take my Sharpie and I'm gonna trace where that lands. And then I'm just gonna cut, I don't know, I think I'm gonna try to cut about 8 or 10 pieces for the top. You can see I didn't get all my pieces the same size. So I'm actually just gonna line them up and I'm gonna press down. And just a reminder, you don't wanna keep your hand in the way of the blade ever. So I wouldn't have my hand over here while I'm cutting. I wouldn't wanna slice my thumb. And I want size 4. I can just keep going over and over that same line, pressing down, holding everything in place. So, got them about the same size. I'm not super happy with this lip hanging off, so I'm gonna make them all exactly the same size. And then this thickness looks pretty good to me. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. Cool. So I'm just gonna trim these down. Okay, so now I have the top to my rustic bench. It's a bunch of layers of cardboard, 8 to be exact. And this is called jogging. When I jog it to see if all of the cardboard is in line by pressing it, tapping it down onto the floor or the table, I can see that they're all pretty close to the same height. And that's, they do need to be close, I would say within 1/4 of an inch of each other. And then what we're gonna do next is I just turned the brown sides out rather than having these pieces with writing, because I like that. Maybe I will decorate it later. What we're gonna do next is we are gonna take anything around our house that is round, and you could even use like a quarter. You want it to be about the size of a quarter, maybe a little bigger. So I have this jar here, I have this tube of paint, and I'm gonna go for the bigger one because I think, my theory is that a larger circle will have more stability. So this is where our legs are gonna go. So we are just gonna mark by tracing around our object. If you want, there's a trick for positioning your legs, which you can use a compass or calipers if you're in the shop. That works really well. Or you can make your own little gauge to line up with the edge and then put a mark on it. So then I put a mark on my gauge, I line it up with my edge. I'm gonna make a straight line that goes in line with that. And then I put a mark on my gauge and I'm gonna line it up with the edge from the other direction. Oops. I wanted to kind of keep that straight. And then you could have that be the center of your circle on every corner, if that makes sense. So you would stay using the same edge of your gauge and you would want to mark it. So I might even just, knowing myself, I would draw an arrow to say, okay, that arrow goes toward the edge. Do my mark. that arrow goes toward the edge, do my mark. And they don't line up here, so what I would need to do is extend my marks. This is where if you made a square out of cardboard, your square would be helpful. So if I use that center mark, my leg would be closer to the corner. I'm just gonna eyeball where my legs go. But if you wanna practice that, that's how we would in the wood shop. That's a version of how we would mark our leg placements. And you could also just measure from the edge to make sure, okay, it's the same distance from here to here and from here to here. And you can measure even between these distances to see how accurate your leg placement is. It does not have to be perfect. You just want them to be closer to the corners. If they're too close to the corners, you might risk a little weakness or the cardboard ripping out here. So you do want some space. I would say at least a finger's, maybe at least a thumb's width away from the edge on both sides would be good. Okay. Okay, so this is where we are now going to start cutting our mortises. So our rustic bench, just like at school, is gonna have a joint that is called a mortise and tenon joint. And the legs are gonna have this kind of shape on the end. In our case, so this is the tenon, right? And then the tenon goes into something called a mortise, which is basically just a hole in a surface, okay? So this goes into there. And that's the joint that keeps our legs and our stretchers in. This is a shouldered tenon. So this part is the shoulder. And you can do that, which I'll show later, but for now we're just gonna make the mortise. Yeah, so it would just be like a hole like this, right? Show that it's got some depth to it. And then we are gonna make a tenon piece, which goes into that. But right now we're gonna just cut our mortises. And I'm gonna use a utility knife. You could use scissors. So just be careful of your fingers. But you could poke a hole. You can even fold the cardboard in half. You just wanna make sure that you're folding it actually at the halfway point of the circle. And then you can go in there and kind of clean that up, either with your scissors, or I'm just gonna clean it up with the utility knife. So this is gonna take a little while. You can lay, if you wanna be really accurate. So for your next layer, we're gonna do this on all of our layers. So for your next layer, you can lay this on top. That's how you need to do it. Like I was gonna say though, if you wanna be really accurate, you can even tape or glue these together as you go, or you could number these like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, or A, B, C, D, so that you know which goes on top of which. And you also are gonna need to have some kind of indicator of which way, especially if you didn't precisely measure the distance of the holes, which way do they go? So if I write my numbers on the top left corner, I know they all need to line up on the top left corner, or I could just do like up, left, right, and make sure to write that on every piece so that my holes will line up when I'm done. So I'm gonna get busy cutting here. Just a couple reminders. Write yourself a code, like I just said. Right, we call that our code in my classroom, so that you know which orientation, which way you're gonna put them back together. And then just to show you, so my circles are made darkish there, and they line up when the codes line up, my left, right, and my center arrow. But when I put it on a different way, you can see that the dark area, there's a big space. So they don't line up both directions because I didn't precisely measure the distance of the legs from each other or from the edges. And then just be really careful when you're cutting, especially if you are using a utility knife. You might want to ask a parent to help. I tend to do I turn as I'm marking my piece. Keeping your fingers out of the way, and then I do one cut on one side enough so that I can see it from the back side, and then I flip it, and then I do my cut on the other side. You should be able to pop it. All right, so I've gotten through almost 4 layers. One more tip that we talk about at school a lot is how we trace. So if I'm tracing with my pen like this, I want to make sure it stays like that from all angles all the way around the circle. Or I can trace holding my Sharpie up, and then I'm just making sure it stays like that, because the thickness of the pen itself can create a distance between the edge of the object you're tracing and the line that you make. And then I'm noticing that my holes are getting smaller and smaller. So when I cut, instead of cutting on the inside of the line, I'm gonna cut on the outside of the line, because I know that my holes are getting a little smaller. All right, I'm just gonna keep going. Whew, that was fun. So now I have 8 pieces of cardboard that have these mortises cut all around the same spot. And it's okay if they're not perfect. It's actually probably gonna work to your advantage if they're a little bit off, because it will keep the legs from slipping. Okay, so I'm just gonna set this aside, and I'm just gonna make sure before I do that. 1, 2, 3, that one I marked wrong, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That all my numbers are lined up, and that all the sides are lined up, and that my holes are lined up as well as they can be. Okay, and now I'm gonna take a big piece, and I'm not sure what exactly is gonna work best for this, but I'm just gonna try. I have these big panels of the box that I cut earlier. Cut the sides off. I'm just gonna try cutting these in half. And I need 4 legs, so this will work well. And you don't have to draw a line or measure or anything, just cut approximately in half. Okay, and then my idea here was that, I'm gonna take a different piece, was that we fold this small little fold, and then this is where you could use tape in a minute, but I'm gonna try to do it without tape. And then I'm just gonna see if I can roll the edge of this. Roll, roll, roll. It's hard because I have a longer piece, so I have to kind of pin down. Yeah. It's working though. I have to pin down where I rolled already so it doesn't unroll. And then, this is good finger exercise. This is good for me as a rock climber to be working my fingers. All right, so the goal is that we get it to be around the same size as the mortise. Okay, and then you could use like tape or string to hold the bottom together. But right now I'm just gonna grab my top and try it. See how this fits into my mortises. And it'll probably fit pretty well because once you get it in there, even if it was smaller to start, the roll will kind of want to come undone and then it will expand. So there's my first leg. So I'm just gonna roll 4 more. All right, so we now have somewhat of a bench. You can see that the legs are kind of like flaring out because they're not taped or fastened together somehow. I'm not too worried about that right now. I'm just playing around with the height of the legs, so I'm gonna try to get the legs all at the same height. And our tenons, my tenons are working pretty well, meaning without a shoulder, meaning that I thought the top might slide a little bit more down because there's no shoulder on the tenon going out to hold it. But it's working okay. And just FYI, in woodworking, these are called through tenons, meaning they go all the way through the surface that they're joining to. So my next step is going to be to make stretchers to go across the short and long sides. So I'm going to need to cut 4 more pieces. So I actually am running low on cardboard, but I do have 1 more big piece. And I have these smaller pieces that could be the stretchers. So I'm just gonna make them longer than I think they need to be, but to start, I'm just gonna take my bench and I'm gonna hold up the piece of cardboard to the edge to make sure that it is the same distance as that is wide. You can also just hold up the pieces to the edge of your top, and a general rule is that you'd want your stretchers to be as long as the top is wide, and then you can always cut them down from there, right? It's easier to cut off than it is to add on. So we will get that done. I'm just gonna roll them the same way I did. Okay, so our next step is gonna be to take out the leg and then take the stretcher we kind of pre-rolled. So here's one of my short stretchers for the short side. And you can see that it is thinner than the leg, that's fine. So I'm gonna take my leg and I'm gonna roll it up to the size that I know it needs to be to fit through the hole, the mortise in the top. Sorry, just fixing it here. Okay, and then I'm gonna hold my stretcher up about where I want it to go on my first leg. And then I want it to go near the flap so that it holds the flap down kind of. And you want to make sure that you keep them tightly rolled because they're going to be stronger if they are tightly rolled, right? Okay, so I trace this shape onto my leg. And then I'm going to cut this shape out. Again, either using scissors or your utility knife. I'm gonna cut it while it's flat actually because that is safer. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe I went a little too close to the edge there. You can always cut your hole a little smaller than you think, and then you can tightly roll up the stretcher, and then it will expand into the hole and fit really tight. Kind of like how wood would expand in the summer with humidity. Okay, so I'm just gonna see if that fits. It does, and then I'm going to, this is where it gets a little tricky. I'm gonna retrace this hole, unroll my leg. So I traced it while it was rolled up, and then cut that shape. And I'm gonna keep doing this until I get all the way around. Didn't cut quite deep enough in there. Okay, I'm gonna keep doing this until I get all the way around, so then I'm gonna roll. And these holes are gonna line up. Awesome, they lined up. And then I'm gonna draw another area so that I know where to cut. You can see I cut too close to the edge and this is already broken off. So I might cheat and use a little bit of tape there. Okay. And then I'm gonna cut this last hole. And I will see if there might be actually one more hole I need to cut. Yeah, I can even just see it right now. I don't have to roll the whole thing up. So I'm just gonna go in there, mark that, and then just trim out like that little bit on the edge that was kind of getting in the way. Okay. I'm gonna do another mark too. So I actually decided I want my stretchers to be through stretchers. So, yeah, so this mark was really close to the other one. So that means that I'm gonna need to do holes that go so those holes line up. So then I'm gonna wanna do holes that go through the back. So I'm marking a hole in the back. For it to go through the back as well. You don't have to do through stretchers, it's gonna be more work, but it will be stronger. I'll tell you that. And then I know there's going to be a hole between these two, but I'm not quite sure where. So I'm going to roll it up again. I'm going to make a mark. So that is a stretcher attached to a leg. And then I'm just gonna keep doing this. So one more key thing is that once you have, you can see I gave in and used some tape, but once you have your stretcher done on one leg, then you're gonna stand up your table, make sure that both of the legs that you're putting the stretcher between touch the ground, and then make a mark where the stretcher meets the other leg so that you can know, you can even like push your stretcher into the other leg and then just trace where it lands. And then do the marking of the holes, unrolling, marking of the holes, unrolling, and then put that other stretcher through. Okay, so I just showed my 5th graders my progress here. And after some feedback from them, got some other ideas. So I knew I was gonna make a stretcher that went across long ways and short ways. I have my other long stretcher here, which I'm about to attach. But I tried sitting on it in front of the 5th graders and it was a wild ride, but here it's not very strong. So they said you could tape together the top layers, you could add an X on the bottom, well that was my idea, for extra support, They also said you could add shoulders to your tenons by wrapping more pieces of cardboard, probably something like a thin piece like this, around at least 3 or 4 times, and then securing that. Either you could make a small pin out of wire or even like a nail that you have around and put the pin through the shoulder of the tenon, or that band that you put around. Or maybe you could tape it down if tape is what you have. But just an idea to keep the tenons, because these are through tenons is what they're called, because they go all the way through the surface that they're joining to. Because they're through tenons, it could slide if the tenons don't have shoulders, right? The top could slide down. I think the problem is more that it's just kind of weak, right? So another suggestion was put a 5th leg in the center, which I'm sure would help. Or another idea of mine is we could do angled brackets that go right into the center there. So challenge yourself, see how far you can get, see if you can build something you or a sibling or a pet could sit on that's really strong, or you could stack a bunch of your heaviest books on, and have fun. Don't get too frustrated. I know it can be a little frustrating, especially making the holes, but have fun with it. If it's not fun, don't do it. Pick another one of my activities and enjoy the reward, which is making your own bench. All right, so the last thing that I'm doing per the design suggestions of my genius 5th graders, well, actually this one was my idea, but 5th graders had many other ideas, which I mentioned before, but I'm gonna make sure that the legs are standing just how I want them, so that they are contacting the floor as well as they can, because I can still move the top to push the legs down. And right, I'm gonna make sure that the top is as flat as it can be. If you have a level, you could use a level, fine. If you don't, no worries. Then I'm gonna flip everything and make sure that it doesn't move. So really gently. And then I'm going to come back with my scissors and I'm gonna poke a hole, trying not to move the top that much. Again, be really careful with your scissors, making sure these scissors actually come apart, so I think it would be safer if I just use, one side of the scissors. Making sure that your scissors aren't sharp enough that they're gonna cut you. You could also just use like a kitchen knife, or you can use an awl or an ice pick to poke through. You could also just be using a drill like I mentioned earlier. And I'm just turning it to make sure that it's kind of round shaped. And so I'm poking these holes at an angle across, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put, I made these 2 sticks and I wrapped them really tight with cardboard, and then I wrapped tape around. And then I'm gonna use these as essentially in woodworking what would be pins to hold our legs in place. And I found that having a pair of pliers is useful to pull things all the way through. Uh-oh. Oops, I poked my hole going the wrong direction on this one. So I'm just gonna re-poke that. Twisting while you're poking. Hopefully that doesn't make that leg like super weak now, because it's got holes going across both sides. All right, we shall see. Pull that all the way through, and then cool. So now we have this X, which should make the seat quite a bit stronger, and it also locks the legs permanently in place. Okay, so mine collapsed even after I reinforced it, and I'm okay with it. I spent probably 3 hours on it, and it's broken now, but I learned a lot. So lessons that I learned that I'm going to share with you so that hopefully you don't get frustrated doing this project. My legs are hollow, so you can see I can stick my finger in there. And I think the major issue is that my legs wanted to bend when I sat down. I mean, the seat is really strong, especially because I did this X, I think. And then I even tried to do these angled stretchers, which aren't working as well because I just folded them in half instead of rolling them into a circle. The circle shape is much stronger. If you can make a triangle tube, that would be really strong too. And then I think if you made your legs, like rolled them really tight so that they were solid and not hollow, that's the major thing that I missed. So you want to roll your legs as tight as you can. It doesn't matter how big they are, it just matters that they are solid and not hollow, because the hollowness made them more bendable when I put my weight on it. Also, this is going to be easier for you, most likely, because if you are a student of mine, you very likely weigh less than I do, so you should be able to sit on your stool more easily. Or you can ask a sibling, little sibling, or even get like a dog and see if it can support the weight of a dog, or just some books or some things that you like. It could be a bedside table. So I think that's my major tip, is just make your legs solid. And then maybe make your legs shorter. My legs were pretty long, so if they're short and stout, they're probably going to be stronger. And last but not least, the size of your stretchers in relation to, my fifth graders know this because they have been working on rustic benches at school, but the size of your stretcher in relation to the size of your leg is really important. Your stretcher needs to be smaller than your leg so it doesn't compromise the structural integrity of your leg. So like here, my stretcher was pretty big. It was like pretty close in size, and I think that made this a weak point. So those are my tips for you, my friends. I can't even stand up anymore. That's okay. Have fun doing this and send me pictures. Let me know how it goes. Miss Levy, out.